Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts. With me, Bill Barley, our storyteller and historian. And I guess what we're not talking about today is a town. We're talking about a man. The first thing, where did we get our images of the Old West?
Well, we got them from a series of famous Western artists from the 1860s right to just after the turn of the century. A lot of names come to mind. Remington comes to mind, Catlin, Bodmer, Farney, Olaf Seltzer, Werner, and there are probably a dozen more that belong in that top echelon of Western artists that gave us our impressions, or people of that time, their impressions of the Old West. Charles Marion Russell, in my considered opinion, was the one who portrayed the West really as it was. Now, there would be great debate about this, but when you look at the other artists, almost without exception, they visited the West. They did not stay there. But when you look at Charles Marion Russell, this is what happened. Born in 1864, he's born in St. Louis, Missouri, and his father is an extremely wealthy man, millionaire by our standards of today. His father wanted him to go right into the firm. He was not scholastic at all, wasn't vaguely interested in school, would rather play hooky and be down on the wharfs and talk to the frontiersmen coming in, and he had an uncle, one of the Bents. The Bent family were related to the Russell family. William Bent was probably the most famous of the Bents. Had a fort in the Arkansas River, and Bent's Fort, well known in American history, and this individual was Charles Marion Russell's hero. Finally prevails upon his family, Mike, to visit the West. Please let me visit the West.
Please, 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 please.
So they said, okay. They finally succumb. They finally give in. You will visit the West. They give him enough cash to go out there, visit, so give him a return ticket. He takes the train out. He lands in Montana. Well, one look at Montana is the last look at the East. He stays for the rest of his life.
And that's what separates him from the others, because he lived it.
In my considered opinion,
yeah?
Very sympathetic to the West and all of the people in the West.
C.M. Russell, the subject of today's Gold Trails and Ghost Towns, will come back and tell his story and take a look at some of his spectacular paintings right after these words. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley talking about Charles M. Russell.
Yep.
The man who lived in the West, and you think that he was probably the best. Do you think he paid for the fact that he stayed out west? I mean, did Remington and all these others make a lot more money and become a lot more famous because of it?
Sure, Remington became famous immediately, almost overnight. For Charles M. Russell, self-taught, really self-taught, had never had an art lesson in his life. He learned in the School of Hard Knocks. He got in as a sheep herder with a guy called Pike Miller, and that didn't work out too well. He was a very, very poor sheep herder. He wasn't much better as a cattleman either, by the way.
And we'll put that down in history, okay.
And finally he hooks up with an old trapper who was a prospector as well, a guy called Jake Hoover. And Jake Hoover was a very, very well-known prospector and trapper in all that Montana country. And he learned a lot from Hoover. And he also, at this particular time, especially with Hoover, a lot of the Indians dropped by Hoover's old cabin. So you had the Crow Indians and, of course, many of the Sioux nations, and you had the Blackfoot Confederacy, and that would be composed of the Bloods, the Pagans, and the Blackfoot proper. And they were, in my considered opinion, not just mine, probably the most powerful nation on the entire Great Plains. Everybody gave the Blackfoot lots of birth. They gave them a wide berth because they dominated their particular part of the Great Plains. And he bought, for instance, his most famous horse, a pinto called Monty, and then he began to work for an outfit called Kaufman and Stadler, and that was 1886. And in that particular year, wind swept down from the northern part of Alberta and literally destroyed the cattle business in Montana. And this is where Charles Marion Russell came to the attention of the public all across the United States. He produced a little drawing on the back of an envelope, and it was of an emaciated cow and some coyotes waiting for this cow to topple over, and the cow is in the snow and the wind is blowing, and he says the last of 5,000. That's the message he sent to Kaufman.
Was that one of his first? That was the first piece of art that the people recognized as being Russell's? Yeah,
very definitely, and he became well-known overnight virtually on that. Now, it's a crude drawing, and his first drawings were crude. And next he steps away from the Judith Basin where he was at, and he drifts across the border and goes up through Blackfoot territory, which was a kind of a dangerous mission. But he gets through Blackfoot territory, And he comes upon a village of the Blood Indians. And there he makes friends with the chief and all the warriors. He stays there for half a year, makes close friends with an old Indian warrior called Medicine Whip. And Medicine Whip was taught him all about Indian ways. And it was probably a toss-up whether or not Charles Marion Russell was going to stay there.
You mean he may have stayed rather than ever go back to white ways?
Yes, many scholars, people who have followed the career of Charles Marion Russell, think that it was just 50-50. He decided to come back eventually, but he never forgot his experience in the northern part of North America, in Canada, especially in what was then known as Northwest Territories, now Alberta.
The other thing that's interesting to me is that the common way to portray Native people to the West was that he was a savage, that he was heartless,
Sure.
he was brutal, and yet when you take a look at Russell's paintings, he was a loving person, he had family ties, he was a spiritual. I mean, this must have run counter to what certainly the West developers wanted people to think about Indians.
Certainly the Army would not have agreed with Russell's portrayal of the Plains Indians. There's not much doubt about that. He was very sympathetic to the Plains Indians. You can see that in his drawings. You can see that even in some of the plates that show the warlike qualities, you know, the finest horsemen in the world. And so certainly he went into this area in 1888, which is interesting. He's a very young man. He's having crude drawings. In fact, Mike, very interesting story. About 1969, I think, I was up in the North Okanagan in a certain town up there, still standing, well known in the North Okanagan, was introduced to an individual. Only 2 or 3 people had been in her house. She was elderly at that time, probably approaching 70 or so. Let me into her house to see her collection, and I looked over her collection, was absolutely astonished by the massive collection she had. Some of that collection is still in the family, and amongst that collection were 2 original Russells, one signed, one unsigned, both oils, and the one that was signed portrayed a Northwest Mounted policeman at the time with the pillbox hat. Later, of course, they took the plain Stetson, and the other one was of Indians, and there was also a signed letter, an illustrated letter. Russell was well known for his illustrated letters, written to her father, and the documentation was perfect. She showed me a photograph, an original photograph, and there is Russell standing in the middle of 2 men with his arms around both of them. One is her father, another is the Indian chief. She had all the regalia from the Indian chief, you know, the vest and the leggings and all the rest of it. It was really quite astonishing. As far as I know, both of those Russells are still in the hands of the family. She has long passed on, and I believe the illustrated letter is still there as well. So we have a guy who started as a very crude artist, but when you look at his later work, Mike, absolutely fascinating.
And he was prodigious in the amount of work that he did.
Portrayed total amount of work that they've counted, just over 2,600. That would be oil paintings, watercolors, drawings, sculptures.
Were these in private hands, very personal things? Would they be included, or maybe are there dozens and dozens of this man's work never seen by anybody else but the family he gave them to?
It's possible. I think there are probably around that high river area in Alberta. There may still be some original Russells left. They would run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars right now, and you can see why. You know, this guy is so clever, such a marvelous craftsman.
Okay, take a break here. We're going to come back, though, and show you some more of the work of Charles Marion Russell right after these words. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley talking about C.M. Russell, Charlie Russell, Charles Russell. Any other nickname?
Well, when he first came there, they called him the Kid. I guess he was 15 years old.
So, the Kid, right.
Yeah.
Harold McCracken wrote a book, and that's what we're using today because the color plates and some black and white plates of Charles Russell's works are right in this book.
Magnificent stuff.
Yeah?
Really quite magnificent.
Now, one of the things that whenever I take a look at artists' work done by European or white artists about the Indian, I always wonder whether or not they were really there or whether they're doing some romantic notion. This painting by Russell shows the Indians hunting buffalo with bow and arrow. Would Russell have ever seen that?
No, he wouldn't have. That would be because he would be doing this in probably the 1890s, 1900s, and but he would have got all the information from Medicine Whip, this old blood Indian old warrior who had befriended Russell.
And so in conversations, he'd learn the technique. He'd say, how did you do this? And Medicine Whip would tell him about how they'd hold the bow and everything like this.
And not only that, he gathered a lot of the Indian artifacts. You go to Great Falls, Montana, in Russell's cabin, you'll see some of the original Indian artifacts of the time.
Yeah. Now this one right here, this is one of those. This is a medicine whip. What is that what that
or
is?
A quirt or a whip, yeah.
Yeah. And what would be the use? I mean, it looks like it could render a person, you certainly get a person's attention with this.
Well, one of two ways. You would whip them across the face with it. That's counting coup.
What is
that's
that?
the greatest insult, counting coup.
Counting coup.
Yeah. And that's the greatest insult you could give an enemy warrior.
Just give
Hit
him
him
a
across
slap
the face, slap across the face with the whip.
And get away with it
and
without
get away with it,
killing
and
him.
ride away without getting killed yourself. And that was the highest honor on the battlefield. So this actually comes Blackfoot, almost certainly,
Yeah.
and very rare piece. They're hard to come by. We know it's original, and we'll discuss that some other time.
All right. And so Medicine Whip was a medicine man with the Blackfoot Nation?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Now this is a black and white painting. There is a color painting of this,
Yeah.
but this is just black and white print of Buffalo Jump.
Yeah.
Now, most of the time I only came to know about buffalo jumps recently, but that's probably how the Indians got most of their meat. They didn't go around shooting them off the hoof.
No. Originally, certainly, before the advent of the gun, when they had the bow and arrow and the lance, they would certainly drive the buffalo over by impounding the buffalo and driving them over a cliff that would disable the buffalo, and then they would take the first buffalo and ceremoniously cut him up.
Butcher it up. Now that's what this is right here.
Yeah.
This is a slab of stone, and it is sandstone, I could presume.
Yeah, it is.
Now it's very distinctive looking. I mean, tell me how you found this.
Well, I found that out of Calgary, just south of Calgary, on a ranch. A rancher let me in there and said, you know, take anything you want, Bill. It's been combed pretty well. And I was sitting up and looking down over an old buffalo jump and looking down at the bend in the river where obviously the teepees would have been. And right in the center of the old camp was this. Took it to an individual I knew. He said, that's very interesting. This is the ceremonial cutting stone, he said, of the first buffalo that was disabled, and they would ceremoniously cut it up, and on this stone.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And so there was their butcher block, but a ceremonial butcher block.
For sure.
And you found this where?
I found this just south of Calgary on a ranch down there.
Yeah, because
Right-
that's where the buffalo jumps were. I mean, there's a great
Yeah.
federal museum right now called at Buffalo Jump,
Yeah.
which is just wonderful to see.
Smashed-in head buffalo jump.
That's right.
Yeah.
And okay, so that's what that is. And may he have seen that? Because with buffalo jumps, or would all the buffalo be gone by this time?
The buffalo, there were still some buffalo around, but not many in the 1880s. The great herds have been decimated. The herds of 3 and 4 and 5 million buffalo were gone. And the Indians were, with the exception of the Indians in Canada, inclined to go back into the original reserve, and they had broken the power of the Indian nations.
All right. Taking a look at another one of Russell's work, this one has him watching the settlers. This again would be fanciful, or again as a result of his conversations?
No, he knew the way of the Indians. There's not much doubt about it. He could read the Indians' mind very, very well, partly from living with them, partly from being very sympathetic, and they understood that. So that these Indians, in this particular, painting, really are looking at. They're seeing the invasion of a new race. Destroys their old way of life, and they're wondering precisely what to do. That's why it's entitled Watching.
Yeah. Sun worshippers.
Yeah. Well, sun worshippers, very interesting. The Indians felt that there was another power. They felt that the sun was extremely important because with it came the seasons, and so they worshipped the sun. And this is why you had the sun dance, the rain dance, and many other ceremonies with the Plains Indians, especially.
Okay. You mentioned that everybody gave the Blackfoot a wide berth. This painting, when Sioux and Blackfoot meet, would do nothing, I guess, to humanize the Indian to the Western world, but it certainly, this is one of the first that really says, gosh, could he ever paint action?
Yeah, this is a firefight. I think this is one of his best portrayals of the Indian warrior on the back of a horse, capable of doing almost anything. This was a story that was described to him in detail by Medicine Whip, the old blood warrior. And so he describes this. Russell paints it years later, which I think is a marvelous, marvelous painting.
Yeah. Trouble hunters. This also, I mean, these proud people. I mean, war with their neighbors was an act of honor, I take it, and something to be looked forward to.
Yes, you didn't trespass lightly on some of the Indian nation's territory. Some you did, some you didn't. Certainly didn't trespass lightly on the Sioux. Most of the Indians he portrays are either Sioux or the Blackfoot Nation, you know, Pagans' Bloods or Blackfoot proper.
And when you take a look at these paintings, do they accurately, I mean, how do the native people of today look upon Russell's work? Was it an accurate portrayal in their opinion?
He made very, very few mistakes. When he portrayed the handprint on the which meant that it was a very valued horse, this was right. When he portrayed the Indian saddle, it was right. When he portrayed the various type of attire they were wearing, he was right.
It was right on.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This particular piece of work gets us to the cowboy. And again, gosh, action was his forte. Look, I mean, this is a bronco invited to breakfast or something like that?
Yeah, well, somebody was showing off. And he got a wild bronc, and the bronc came in on the breakfast. Well, the cook would not be very pleased. Cooks were notoriously short of... They didn't have a sense of humor. And the cook is probably going to grab one of the knives close by. He is not happy at all. He's not a happy camper because the breakfast is gone. He's got to start over. This guy who is on the bronc will not get breakfast. I guarantee that.
He'll be getting the tough cuts for some time to come.
You bet.
After this
breakfast
one.
Not for a while.
Yeah. Now, he used colors, too, that were, I mean, much more vibrant. I mean, there was quite a somber period, but his are just leap out at you.
And not only that, his action is so good.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see, you could almost a portrayal, almost a photograph of what actually would have happened.
Now, tell me what is this is In Without Knocking?
In Without Knocking, and I imagine now you know there's a liquor bottle there. The cards are outside the door. Somebody went out very, very annoyed, threw the cards outside, then decided to come back in with the rest of the gang. They may be after tin horn gamblers. Quite possible they are. So they're riding right in after this guy. Did happen again. Depends whether the gambler was straight or whether he was a tin horn. If he was tin horn, well, sometimes they got pretty short shrift.
Now, so the Hoffman Hotel would not be the same after this particular fort.
Most definitely.
Do you think that he saw this? Do you think Russell saw this? Because this was a kind of mayhem that was still happening in the 1880s.
Yeah, when the cowboys were on the prod, they quite often rode right through. If they had room, they could ride right through the swinging doors, right into and they thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeehaw.
The proprietor did not.
They'd had darn little human contact for a while, so that's it. Outlaws, of course, this is what the pulp novel was all about.
Yeah.
I mean, the outlaw, the rustler, and this one here, again, shows the action, the danger, the violence of the time.
Well, if you were caught, as these two are in this portrayal, in this marvelous painting...
The cinch ring.
Yeah, well, the cinch ring would act as another running iron. They just used a cinch ring to change the brand. Sometimes they'd skin a brand, sometimes they use a cinch ring to change it to their own brand.
So a cinch ring is just a big metal ring which you could heat up, and then if you applied it to the cow's hide, you could change the shape of the brand.
Yes, as long as nobody caught you. And in this case, these guys are caught. One has been shot already. His partner has a real problem, and the partner is he's got to cut loose because the
calf is still attached
to the lariat, and he's got to cut loose, and he will leave his partner behind because it's sudden death for him. It's already his partner is probably on his way, and the ranchers are bearing down on him, and they're not fooling around. This is lynch law at its best.
And just to see this guy, his positioning, the way they've got this guy positioned, he is frozen in just a most dramatic position.
Oh,
just
sure.
The action is again
and
spectacular.
it was a dangerous time, you know. I mean, this was the West when.
This was a Wild West.
That's right. When the Indian nations felt that it was their country, they had been there since time immemorial, and they didn't take trespass easily. And this next painting is very interesting.
This one always gets me. There are some modern painters trying to do this kind of subtle stuff, but this is when shadows hint death.
Yeah, and
unfortunately this is in black and white, but you can see the shadows on the far rim of the painting.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because these two guys are probably looking for strays, and suddenly they see shadows up very shortly just across the draw. Looking at the shadows, they're Indian shadows. The Indians look like they're on the prod, and they quickly grab the muzzle of their horse so the horse won't neigh.
And won't give them their location away because
it
could be
sudden death.
an ugly moment
Yeah.
in cattle ranching.
Sudden death for sure.
And of course, the threat of that the Indians posed to settlers coming across the West, even though Russell may have had great sympathy for the Indians, I guess he still portrayed them as dangerous people.
Yeah, there's no doubt that they were menacing in some areas, and some of the portrayals indicate why. Now, these Indians, and this particular one, are looking down at a fort that's just been established. This is their territory, and they are wondering whether or not it's worth their while to take this intruder on.
Yeah, look at the chief here. He's actually got he's stroking his chin with his hand.
And two of the more brave warriors are looking at it, and they're ready to go. He's not too sure. And this is marvelous, marvelous portrayal. So we had Russell portraying a number of different things. He did not portray the U.S. Army. I don't think he had a lot of sympathy. He left that to Remington. He left that to Farney. He left that to others. He did portray, however, the cowboy, the Indians, the rustlers, and he portrayed the Northwest Mounted Police.
And we've got a couple of prints of the Northwest Mounted Police right here. And again, I mean, when you send in the cavalry, what that indicates is you're sending in dozens and dozens of people. Yeah. This is a single-handed arrest. Yeah. Tell me about this.
There's no doubt about it. He paints this 25 years after he'd been in that area around High River and up in that blood country, and he was very impressed with the Northwest Mounted Police. And they, I think, were the most efficient law enforcement body on anywhere in the Great Plains. Not much doubt about it at all. They sent in a constable when they thought the constable could make the arrest. Yeah. This actually happened. Fugitive on the run, he goes right into the Blackfoot camp, armed with a Winchester. Everyone else is armed to the teeth. Picks this guy out, taps him on the shoulder. You come with me. And he made it.
Well, you can see that there is another warrior sitting here, and he's also saying, I wonder what I do in a situation like this. Yeah. And the obvious indication is that nothing. The pride was there.
That's right. Okay. And generally speaking, they ruled with a very fair hand. Yeah. So you know, this is one of a number he had of the Northwest Mounted Police.
But we've run out of time. So we can't show anymore, but Russell's only got 2,600. We only could do 2,600 more shows, I suppose. Marvelous. Bill, a fascinating story.
Marvelous artist.
Charles M. Russell. And we hope you've enjoyed it. See you next time on Gold Trails.